TheOneTAR!
Welcome back to the next episode in the Tiffany Teaches How to Paint Mice and Mystics series. Today's episode we are talking about the rats, who are the last villain characters that we will be painting, and thus it will be the last episode of this series for a while because Essen is coming up and Essen is consuming my entire life. So there's that. So with every episode in this series, we've been working up and building the techniques that you have available in your technique library to use. And today with the rats, we're gonna kind of use all of them. You should feel pretty comfortable with the brush now. You should be comfortable with like your larger brush versus the fine tip brush. You should be comfortable with concepts such as dry brushing and washing and layering and things like that. And so we're just kind of gonna build all those up together to paint the rats. There are 6 rats in this game, and we're actually gonna paint 2 color palettes for these rats. I divide the rats into two groups of 3, and we're gonna paint one group brown and one group gray. All of the paints that you need to paint this figures are over there. And so if you are painting the brown rats, you're basically just gonna need the same exact color palette that we had for the centipede, with the addition of pink for their cute little mousy noses, and yeah, that's actually, oh, and honed steel for their weapon. If you want to paint the gray rats like how I painted the gray rats, you need the same palette with the addition of a lighter gray color and with the addition of antique gold, which is what I used for their shoulder. It's the shoulder. Their shoulder like protector piece. If you don't want to paint their shoulder protector piece a bronzy gold color, that's fine. You can just do honed steel or something like that. We're gonna mix it up a little bit. Even though we are painting 2 color palettes, the techniques that I'm using are exactly the same for both color palette. The difference is what paints you are using for like the first half of this. So I'm actually going to show you how to paint the gray and the brown at the same time, just alternating between them because the technique is exactly the same. And when I was painting them, I actually painted them at the same time because by the time I was done painting the gray rats, my brown rats would have dried, and so I could move on to the next stage for painting the brown rats. And then when I finished painting the next stage on the brown rats, then the gray rats were ready, and you get the idea, right? All right, so let's get into this because I've already talked way too much. First things first, for the brown rats, I went ahead and did a base layer on their fur with a light brown color. So for me, that's the Reaper Minis Leather Brown. For you, might be something else. For the gray rats, I did a light gray base color using my light gray color, which is Celestra Gray from Citadels. So I ended up watering it down a little bit more than I did my Reapers. And so remember, when you're doing this base layer, we are not going for full complete coverage. It's okay if you see the primer color through it. You just kind of want a good general coverage of the fur area and only the fur area. Don't paint the hands, the feet, the weaponry, just paint the fur. It's totally fine if you paint the eyeball, not a big deal at all. You just want to make sure that your paint is thin so you're not losing any detail, and you want to make sure it's not pooling in any of the fur, which is something that's totally going to happen to you, so just be mindful of that. Now that all of your rats are completely covered in this base color, we're gonna go ahead and start building up layering. And this layering is gonna build up similar to how we did the spider, not really how we did the centipede, where we're gonna use the same paint thinned down, and we're just gonna build up select areas and slowly recede where we are painting so that only certain areas are like really built up. All right, so we're gonna mix up some paint for the layering. For the brown rats, we're gonna do 1 to 2 drops ratio of 1 drop of medium brown with 2 drops of water. For the gray rats, you're gonna do the same thing with a medium gray. For me, this was Harvest Brown for the brown, Reaper's Minis, and then Reaper Mini paint. And then for the gray, I did a, what did I do? Shadowed Stone was my medium gray. And again, because I was using Reaper Miniatures paint, which is a little thinner, I went with a 1 to 2 ratio. If you're using a thicker paint like Citadels Miniatures paint, maybe do a 2 to 1 ratio of paint to water. Mix it up really good, and then we're gonna do the first layers. So with the brown and the gray, you're gonna do the layering the same with the associative colors, but you're gonna focus on that back ridge and the front of the knees, the buttocks, and the like swole muscles. You know what I'm talking about. But you kind of have to paint the swole muscle yourself, if that makes sense. You kind of want to do like a little curve around the muscles. You want to paint that ridge line, that back really good. Basically anywhere where skeletal structure of the rat would be pushing against the fur. So any place that has some good curvature or we want to draw attention to, we don't really want to paint anything that would have like direct light on it. So the tops of the shoulders, don't worry about that so much, but like the side of the shoulder, do that part. The cheeks are good. Just like give it a little blush, right? And then like the tip of the snout, right? Do that part of the ratty nose with this layering. And you're actually gonna do 4 layers with the same exact paint mixture. So you're not gonna worry about thinning it. You're not gonna be darkening this paint. You're just gonna be using the same paint, but you're gonna have to wait for each layer to dry. So you paint this first layer, and then you go ahead and wait for that to dry. Then you paint the second layer where you paint a little less in all of those areas. And then on the third layer, again, you paint a little less. And then by the time you get to the 4th layer, you're just painting just that top ridge of the spine, just that top curve of the thigh, just the underside of the rat buttocks, and just the swole of the muscles, including the pectorals, if that is your mousy rat jam, I guess. Yeah. Now, we're gonna get into the gear. And so I recommend from here on out using your fine tip brush because we're gonna be doing more fine tip detail. And you should be pretty comfortable with that fine tip brush now after painting all of those centipede layers because, yeah. For basing all of the equipment and gear and clothing on these rats, I actually don't thin the paint at all. And again, that's because I am using Reaper Minis paint, which is already a little thin. If you're using Citadels Minis paint, maybe do a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 drops of paint to 1 drop of water. You will know your paint consistency more than I will at this point. So use what makes sense for you. But for me and painting the gear, I like to have my paint thick enough where I just have to do 1 layer and I don't have to worry about doing a second layer when it comes to painting this gear. For painting the gear, I like to do the leather cuffs and the leather shoulder strappy bit on the rats the opposite color of their fur. So for the brown rats, I do a shadowed stone, belt, and leather cuffs. For the gray rats, I do the harvest brown belt and leather cuffs instead. I like the swappings of the colors for those. So I just did a little bit of paint for those, and then I just carefully painted with the fine tip brush, the leather cuff, and the shoulder strap. Once you have all of the leather painted, we're now going to go ahead and start painting the weaponry. Yes, yes. So for the sword hilt and the sword guard, I painted those shadowed stone, so medium gray, and I did that color for all of the rats. The swords I made exactly the same for all the rats. If you want to mix it up on the swords, feel free, like honestly. I also painted the metal bar that is holding the blade to the hilt. I painted that shadowed stone as well. And don't worry about painting over those like bolts. Just go ahead and do it. We'll fix that later. You just want to be very careful and try to use as much control as you can to only be painting the sections that you want to be painting. And honestly, don't worry about painting down into cracks and crevices. Remember, we're going to go over this entire figure with a wash, and it's going to get in all those nooks and crannies, and it's going to darken them, and it's going to hide the fact that we didn't paint those areas at all. So don't worry about being insanely precise with your paint layering. Now we're going to use metallic paint to paint the sword blade and the spike on the cuff, because there's a spike on the cuff holding the sword, because why not? But metallic paint, if you haven't painted it before, it behaves a little differently. There is like a glitter mixed in with it. It's not actually glitter, I don't know what it is. But it's thicker and it doesn't flow the same as normal paint. And so with metallic paint, the direction of your strokes is super important. So I find that with the sword, you want to be painting down the sword. And nice even strokes, and you can go back and fix it. It's just that with metallic paint, because of the consistency, it shows every stroke that you do. So if you paint like every which direction it will show. You just want to make sure you're being consistent in your line movements. And you'll also find that it's just a little thicker and it globs a little easier. So keep that in mind when you're painting with a metallic paint. Also, metallic paint is really, really tricky to thin. So if you wanted to thin your metallic paint, water's not going to do the trick because it will mix really oddly with whatever makes it sparkle, and you'll just get like this weird inconsistent flow. It's just better not to do it unless you have what is called a medium, which is what they use to make paint. Anyway, you like put an acrylic medium in, which is a type of chemical, and I don't really know specifics on that. But yeah, don't try to thin the metallic paint is basically what I'm going with. You should have some metallic paint still on your palette. Go ahead and paint the shoulder patty thingy of the brown rats. And for the gray rats at this point, I paint their shoulder patty thingy antique gold or just a gold bronzy color, just so that there's some color difference between the two types of rat groups. If you want to paint your gray rats with a silver thing, that's totally cool. If you want to try blending the honed steel, the silver metallic, with a yellowish color, I honestly don't know what's going to happen with that. Good luck. But if you didn't want to buy a gold paint and just try blending your own metallic, give it a go. I don't know what'll happen. Experiment. Get messy. You all are good enough in your painting career at this point. Like, you've painted so many things at this series and followed us along, where I'm just like, no, you got this. I'm just going to tell you what colors I painted in the order that I painted them in, because I'm pretty sure you're good. You got this. So after that, all that's left is the details. So their nose, their ears, their hands, their feet, their tails. Oh, I hate painting their tails. Those, all the little segments. So repetitive. So what you're gonna do is, for the fleshy bits, I paint a flesh tone, which I totally had in the list of paints, but I forgot to mention, whoops. But I have a tanned skin flesh tone. If you have a more pinky flesh, that's totally fine. I just have tan skin, so that's what I used. But you wanna paint the hands, you wanna paint the feet, and you wanna paint the tails. And it's important with the hands, you'll notice the fingers aren't all the way wrapped around the sword. So if this is the sword, right, on the back side, they have, you see this part of the hand, and then you have to remember on the inside of the figure, there's only like this amount of fingers happening, right? So you really just need to go like almost a dry rush on the fingers. Don't worry about getting in the cracks. The wash will cover the cracks. You just almost just need to go dunk, dunk on the fingers. It's not a big deal. You want to make sure that you try and evenly distribute the paint across the tail, so as it doesn't clump in the things, the nubbins, the lines between the sections of the tail. You don't want that to happen. Just make sure that you're moving your paint around on the tail so that you don't lose any detail on the, well, anywhere really where you're doing the flesh colors. You don't want to lose the detail on the feet. There's some like tendon detail that you can see. You don't want to lose the detail on the back of the hands where you can see the bones, like that detail. So you don't want to go too thick on that paint, but you do want to make sure you get good coverage. All right, the last thing to do before we give these figures a nice wash is their teeth, their white, shiny teeth. So I just did pure white because I knew the wash would darken it. Plus I feel rats are creepier with nice bright white teeth. So the two front teeth, those are the easiest to paint with white. You'll think that the ones like that they're showing on the sides of the jaws are difficult to paint, but they're actually pretty easy. You just want to make sure that you don't get too much of the lip painted white. You can almost just put a little bit of white on the edge and just kind of dot it onto the teeth, and then once it's dotted on there, just kind of spread it around a little bit. I don't worry about going for full coverage. I don't worry about painting between the gaps in the mouth. You can see here, it's just like, I just smear some white paint in the mouth hole. That's a technical term. And the reason I'm not worried about it is because the wash is going to bring back all the shiny mouth detail that I erased by just going with the white paint. Also, it'll bring the brightness of the white teeth down a bit, and I can kind of decide as I'm washing the figures how much I want to bring down the cleanliness of these rats' teeth. For the wash, I use Agrax Earthshade, and I wash these figures. I go ahead and do a really dense wash all over this figure, and then I go back and soak it up and clean it up to clean up the lines and make them as defined or as undefined as I want. So the areas where I make sure that I get a nice crisp wash line would be where the legs meet the body on the belly, the armpits. The wash will seep nicely into the little dips and crevices of the fur. You want to make sure that you move it around so you have kind of an even coverage all over the fur. The wash will also make your tail it'll bring the lines back in the tail and make your tail look more 3D. It will help with that gradient that we painted with the layers. It'll help even it out and make it look more like a natural fur situation. It'll bring out details on the legs and the hands with the tendons. You want to do the sword to make the sword look not as shiny and awesome. So yeah, you just wash this figure really well and then go back and soak it up where it's too much, okay? Yeah. After you've done your wash and the wash is dried, which will take quite a while, now I just like to go back and do the finishing touches, which would be the eyes and the nose. I go ahead and do what is called, I think, Emperor's Children pink for the nose, and I just do like almost a dry brush, like took right on the nose. Some of them I'll go up the nose a little bit, but I like the look of the bright pink noses on these like vicious rats. So that's my opinion. If you don't have a pink, you can make a pink with a red and white paint if you do have a red. And you should have a white, so yeah. For the eyes, I go ahead and do yellow for the eyes to match the other villain eyes that I have. You could do red. I did red for one set. That was super creepy. Or you could just do black eyes if you wanted, just normal black eyes. I do black eyes for the heroes, so I like the difference of the yellow eyes for the rats with the black eyes for the heroes. So that's an option. That's a decision you have to make. But for the eyes, don't freak out too much about these eyes. They're just as simple as the centipede. You just want a little dot of paint on your brush and you just go boop right on the eyeball. Don't worry about getting down into the eyeball. The wash should have enough good definition of the eye socket that you shouldn't need to, you don't want to cover up that detail of like depth that the wash gave us for the eye socket. Just up right on the ball of the eye will work. I actually had one rat who I lost some detail through my layering and the wash I didn't get enough wash in it. So his eye wasn't popping the right way. Like you couldn't really, his eyeball wasn't as defined in the eye socket. So I decided that that rat had lost an eye. So I just, you know, freestyled a scar. I took some black paint, did like a line, and then I mixed some red with some brown and did over that black line to make it look a little grosser. So yeah, I have one rat with a missing eye, you know, because why not? Other details or things that you could add to your figures that I've done in the past is I took honed steel and I actually took polished silver, which is a brighter metallic silver color, and I did a very light dry brushing on the edges and sides of the swords to make them look like they'd been used, and the areas where they had been used the most was like scratched up and shiny because it had been like cut, if that makes sense. Another detail that you could do is you could do a very, very, very light dry brushing of whatever the layering color or the base light color is on the fur, and I mean very light dry brushing. So for the brown rats, you could do a very, very, very light dry brushing of the light brown on top of the fur, which would help bring back some of the fur detail. I would do that before I painted the eyes and the nose though, but after I did the wash. You could also, if you wanted, you could do a red wash for the flesh bits instead of doing Agrax Earthshade. So you could do like a pinky red wash that you just make yourself to make the hands and feet and tail look more pinky flesh toned, pinkish radish flesh toned. That's up to you. That's another easy thing that you can do. So yeah, there's a lot of detail that you can get. You can customize a lot. You can do the shoulder plate thingies, a different color for each of them. You could make different size squads. You could try different color palettes using this technique. Like, go crazy. Be creative. Do what you want. This is your figure set. This is your copy of the game. I just wanted to give you an idea, an inspiration, and a jumping off point for these figures. After you have let your creative juices flow on these rats, phrasing. It's time to base them. So to paint the bases of the figures. And the bases on these figures are like really simple after the centipede because there's only 3 contact points and you can get your brush basically around all of them. So go ahead and mix up whatever your villain base color is. For me, that was 2 drops of shadowed stone with 1 drop of white paint. Because I was basing 6 figures, I went ahead and doubled that recipe. So I did 4 drops of shadowed stone with 2 drops of white paint, mixed it up really well, and I painted all of the bases of my rats that nice gray color that is consistent now with all of my villains across this entire set, and it helps them really blend together. And I do say villain base color because the heroes I paint a slightly different base color, so it makes it easier to identify. I mean, they're painted differently and they'll be more colorful, but it still makes it easy to identify from like across the table which base is whose and like adjacency things and stuff like that. That's it! That's the villains! That's the rats, that's the centipede, that's the spider, that's the roaches. You now have a very intimidating and like creepy villain set for the Mice and Mystics series, and you should be proud of that set because it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to paint them, and you stuck with it and you did great. You did. I would absolutely love to see anything that you painted with this tutorial series. You can find me as TheOneTAR on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Gmail. Send me an email at TheOneTAR@gmail.com with your pictures of your painted mice and, well, not mice yet, but rats and centipedes and spiders and things like that. Or if you're painting something else using this series as inspiration, it doesn't have to be Mice and Mystics. I still would love to see it. Seriously, I love being tweeted pictures of minis that people are painting. It inspires me to paint more. So, yeah. Speaking of which, we are on hiatus now. So Essen is very quickly approaching, and Essen is like the big show for Steve and I for the year, and so we're going to Essen and we're vlogging and we're doing some other cool video project stuff, and I just don't have the time to keep up with this series right now. So this series is on pause until after the Essen dust settles, so probably around Christmas, and we're gonna come back and we're gonna paint the heroes. And when we paint the heroes, those episodes, like these episodes, they go faster, right? Because you're learning to paint as we go. So the hero episodes, I'll be doing 2 heroes an episode, and the first heroes would be Nez and Flitch. So if you want to paint Nez and Flitch when we get to that, actually, you know what? For the heroes, you're gonna have some time, but basically all of the paints that you're gonna need for the heroes are down below in the doobly-doo, and I've divided it by the heroes so you can just look and see what paints you might need to acquire before the next hero episode. Yeah, so there's not basically like the clothing items that they have that are very unique and different. That's the only additional paint that you need. So for example, you need a purple to paint, oh, I forget their name. One of the cloaks is purple, one of the cloaks is green, one is bright red. So yeah, that's sort of just the things that you'll need to help paint along with the heroes. But like I said, that's not gonna come until December. So keep an eye on the YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already so that you'll know when it's happening. Or you could be a Patreon and support me on Patreon, and then you would know when it's coming because I let my Patreons know super early, or as early as I know, for a lot of that stuff. And if you are already backing me on Patreon, thank you very much. Seriously, it does mean a lot, and it enables us to go to Essen and do other awesome things like create these video series or other videos like reviews and whatnot that I have on this channel. So thank you. And I'll see you all at Essen. Thank you for watching, and I hope this end screen is less awkward than the other ones. You can watch any other videos in the series over there, or you can go to my Patreon and check it out and maybe support me. That would be awesome. No pressure though. Alright, I'll see you all at Essen, and I hope that you have a good day.
TheOneTAR!